Welcome back to Casual EDH, this is Chris. Today we're going to be doing the channel's first deck tech over Ezuri, Renegade Leader. This is a mono-green elf deck that's going to punch your opponents really hard in the face. So you may be thinking to yourself, why Ezuri instead of one of the other elf commanders? It depends on what you want to do with your elf deck. He's a mono-green, so you do lose some options, but honestly, with the way you play Ezuri, you don't really need those options. Ezuri himself is 3 mana for a 2/2. Of course, he's an elf. And he has, for green, you can regenerate another target elf. Cannot regenerate himself. He also has 2 and triple green elf creatures you control get +3/+3 and gain trample to the end of turn. Literally, this is a repeatable overrun. This has no other cost. It doesn't require tapping or anything. So if you can generate a lot of mana, you can get a lot of bonuses onto your elves. And that's really the point of this deck. You're just intended to punch people in the face really hard with elves and beat them that way. Most of the time, you're taking out your entire table in a single turn. As we go along in the video, I'm going to talk about the cards I have in the deck. I'm going to break them into groups. We're going to talk about what the purpose of each group is, as well as maybe a few of the individual cards. And I'm going to have all the cards on the screen. That way you can follow along and build the deck yourself if you would like. Alright, so to start with, we're going to talk about the land base here. Because this is a monocolored deck, the land base is pretty simple. We are going to start with 23 basic forests. A lot of people like to set their basic lands apart from the rest of their deck, either through color or design. This is so that when you're searching through your deck, it's a little bit easier, a little bit quicker. If you're looking for anything other than the basic land, then you can just kind of skip through cards really quickly. The deck also has 8 non-basic lands, which will bring the land total up to 31, which is a little bit low for a commander deck. However, the elf deck does not require as much mana to run, and it has a lot of creatures that generate mana. And actually, to end the game, you care more about the creature-based mana than you do the land-based mana. Typically only need to have maybe 4 or 5 lands out, and then your creatures will win the game for you. So it's okay to be a little bit low in this case. For the non-basic lands, we have Castle Garenbrig and Blighted Woodland, which both do basically the same thing. They just do a little bit of ramp. Oran-Reef the Vastwood is one of the 2 cards in here that are guaranteed to come into play tapped. It can either tap to give green creatures +1/+1 counters if they came into play this turn, or taps for green. We have 2 non-basic forests, Sapseep Forest and Gingerbread Cabin. Both have effects that will help you gain life, which is important for one of the cards in the deck if you need to go to an alternate win strategy. Tyrite Sanctum, which is to protect your commander, giving him indestructible. Cavernous Souls is a way to make your creatures uncounterable and also generate green. The last card is Yavimaya, Cradle of Growth. Now, this may seem like an odd inclusion. It's not to correct your mana. It's actually to enable a couple of Forest Walkers that are in your creature pool. I'll talk about those specifically later, but basically what it is to give your opponents forests, which is exactly what you need to help defeat them. Moving on, there are going to be 18 instants or sorceries. The first couple of cards here, Primal Command and Beast Within, are our board interaction to deal with problematic cards that other players have. Primal Command has several modes, which means it also has uses in other situations. The ones that I usually choose are to put a non-creature permanent on top of an opponent's library and then have them shuffle their library. So if I have like a troublesome artifact or something, that's one of my ways of getting rid of it. Works really good with like the Theros God cards, because if they're not creatures when you're targeting them, then it's just a good way to get rid of them, because there really aren't any ways to get around indestructibility in this deck. And of course, Beast Within, it's a green staple. Just choose a permanent until it's a 3/3 beast now without its other effects. Heroic Intervention, permanents you control gain hexproof and indestructible until end of turn. Fog, prevent all combat damage that would be dealt this turn. You're going to spend turns where you're just tapped out because your creatures are tapping for mana and you need to advance your board state. So Fog is a way to just prevent people from capitalizing on that. And of course, Vines of the Vastwood. It's a great card. It gives a weird hexproof. What it does is it makes it so that target creature can't be targeted by opponent's spells or abilities till end of turn. So for your creatures, that's hexproof, but for their creatures, it's like hexproof, except you can still target them. So they don't gain actual hexproof. I've definitely used it to stop combos in the past. I also have 2 options for Graveyard Recursion. We have Revive and Regrowth. There are 4 ramps in the deck. We have Cultivate, Bounty of Skemfar, Nature's Lore, and Skyshroud Claim. Bounty of Skemfar also lets you basically get a creature back in your hand, which is really nice. So among the last cards I'm going to talk about for instance in sorceries, we have Collected Company, which lets you get a couple creatures off the top of your deck. Basically look at the top 6 cards and put up to 2 creatures with CMC 3 or less onto the battlefield. Genesis Wave, when you're producing a lot of mana but you are not quite there with your combo, you can use Genesis Wave to get a lot of permanents off the top of your deck. Tooth and Nail, classic commander card. Chords of Calling, classic commander card. Green Sun's Zenith. And Shamanic Revelation, it doesn't get stuff out of your deck, but it does let you get more options off the top of your deck. They go into your hand, but any kind of sifting is good in this deck because there are certain combos that you want to get done. Any way you can do them is great. Now, beyond all of this, there's still one instant or sorcerer I haven't talked about. Hurricane is in here as an alternate win condition because sometimes you just can't attack people. So the great thing with Hurricane is you can pay X and green, and it deals damage to all players and all creatures with flying equal to X. So as long as you have even one more life point than an opponent, you can use this to burn them out with the amount of mana you generate in this deck. Even if you don't have more life points than all of your opponents, it's not really a big deal as long as you can take out the person who's preventing you from doing combat damage. Because it might be like you're going against a Turbo Fog deck or some other like creatures can't attack deck, and as long as you can take them out, you can finish the others through more conventional means. The deck has 6 artifacts. Vanquisher's Banner and Herald's Horn both do very similar things. They give a slight buff to the field, and they also help you get to more of your creatures. Umbral Mantle and Staff of Domination are combo enablers. You want to get creatures out that can generate so much mana that you can untap them using these effects, and then tap them to get even more mana so that you have more and more mana. Remember, your commander is a mana dump. You can dump as much mana as you want into it and just make infinitely large creatures. Basically, the most important thing is to have something that taps for mana, and then something that untaps it. So that's what those are in there for. The last 2 Commander's Plate and Lightning Greaves are there to protect your commander. He cannot regenerate himself, although he can regenerate other elves. So you want to protect him as much as possible, so making him untargetable with Lightning Greaves, or just giving him protection from other colors with Commander's Plate. These are just fairly inexpensive ways of protecting him. The build for this deck runs 2 Planeswalkers, Nissa who Shakes the World and Freyalise Llanowar's Fury. Nissa's literally just for mana generation, making it so that forests tap for additional mana, and then giving a way to untap a forest is really all she's in there for. Freyalise, she creates 1/1 elf druids that tap for mana. Under the right circumstances, even those druids can be used to go infinite. They also count towards effects like Elvish Archdruid and Priest of Titania, which we're going to talk about later. There are 7 enchantments in the deck. Sylvan Library and Sylvan Anthem are both to get even further into your deck. Sylvan Anthem doesn't actually draw cards, it scries, but basically you just scry what you don't need to the bottom. That gives you more opportunity to get what you do need. Defense of the Heart is another way of getting key components out of your deck. Mana Reflection is one of the cards that's going to help you go infinite with your mana producers, because basically by doubling the amount of mana that they can produce, you lower the threshold that they need to be able to produce in order to be untapped through the untap effects and then create the infinite mana. So cards that would not normally go infinite will go infinite because of Mana Reflection. Asceticism and Sandworm's Convergence are both in there for protection. Asceticism will give all your creatures hexproof. Sandworm Convergence will make it so that flyers can't attack you, which is very important because this deck is very lacking in flying defense. I would also make some 5/5 ground worms, but those aren't really that important. Concordant Crossroads. So it's a 1 mana enabler. You do not play this until you're confident that you're going to win the game, because it gives all creatures haste. All of them, including your opponents. So what you do is you drop this on the turn that you need to win the game, that you need to tap your creatures that are coming into play, that you need to go swing out with the creatures coming into play, because you don't want to give your opponents a turn with haste. If you have nothing else to play on turn 1 and this is in your opening hand, do not play it. It's actually more detrimental to you to play it too early. Alright, and then last we come to the creatures. There are 34 creatures in the deck. Most of them are elves, not all of them. So to start with, we have a trifecta: Elvish Mystic, Fyndhorn Elves, and Llanowar Elves. All 3 of these cards are literally the same card. It is frustrating to me that they will just reprint this one card to death with different names so that you can keep playing it, but not other cards. So that gives you 3 1-drops that give you mana. Circle Dream Druid is actually like a Gaia's Cradle on a creature. It adds 1 green for each creature you control, including itself. Devoted Druid is one of the cards in here that combos out the easiest. It actually has its own untap effect on it. So as long as it taps for enough green before it kills itself, you can give it buffs via Ezuri. So you want to tap for at least 2. So you want to have Mana Reflection out, or one of the cards I'm going to be talking about here in a minute. And what will happen is, as long as it can tap for at least 2, you can untap it with its effect, putting a -1/-1 counter on it. And then, as long as you have enough mana to activate Ezuri at least once, you give it +3/+3, which will allow you to untap it 3 more times without killing it. So as long as you can generate at least 6 mana during those untaps, you will float 1 green mana, and be able to activate Ezuri again to give it another 3 toughness to be able to do it again, float another mana, go infinite. Does mean it dies at the end of the turn, but typically when you're doing that combo, you're winning. You're probably not going to need to go to another turn, but if you do end up having to go to another turn, you're not going to have your Devoted Druid at that point. Priest of Titania and Elvish Archdruid are both the same card. Elvish Archdruid also gives +1/+1 to elves, but basically tap for green equal to the number of elves. Good when you're trying to go infinite, because they can generate just a ton of mana, so they can untap themselves with one of the cards we mentioned earlier. Lastly, we have Llanowar Tribe, which just taps for 3 mana. It's very simple, but when you start adding doubling effects onto it, that does let it hit the threshold to create infinite mana. Alright, and now we're going to go into some more of the support elves in the deck. We have Galagreators, which has Alliance, and it has several effects on that Alliance, but the main one that you're probably going to be using is going to be create the tap treasure token, although if you can get a couple creatures out in a turn, you might also want to just gain the life. Again, you do have Hurricane in there as a backup, which you want to have more life than your opponents if you are going to use. That 2 life you get from that can be a little bit sneaky. What else will get you a forest from your deck? Nothing big there, just a little bit of ramp. Tireless Provisioner, same thing, it has landfall, create treasure token. Could also create a food token. And again, that's not awful if you're going to go for the Hurricane win to get your life points up. Eternal Witness will let you get a card out of your graveyard. Well Wisher will let you gain life for each elf on the battlefield. Again, alternate win condition, want to have life. And then Reclamation Sage to destroy an enchantment or artifact on the field. Again, does not affect indestructibility, but very little in the deck will. So if you have something that's pretty problematic to you at the time, you can use Rec Sage for it. To continue on with our elf support cards, we have Sylvan Messenger, which lets you get elves off the top of your deck into your hand. We have Canopy Tactician, who gets +1/+1 and also taps for 3. We have Yeva, Nature's Herald, giving flash to your creatures is always strong. Allosaurus Shepherd is in here purely to make your spells uncounterable, although the ability to make your elves into dinosaur elves that have a higher base power and toughness is pretty nice. Realmwalker isn't actually an elf, but because it's a changeling, it is technically an elf because it is all creature types. It also lets you choose elf. That lets you play elves off the top of your deck directly. So basically it gives you an additional card in your hand sometimes, letting you utilize the top of your deck. And Beast Whisperer is just a really nice card to have in a lot of creature-based decks, and he just happens to be an elf as well. He just lets you draw cards. We have Imperious Perfect, who is a lord that can also create elf warrior tokens. We have Elvish Warmaster, which will help create tokens and also can give buffs. Elvish Visionary just comes into play, draws a card. Taunting Elf, that makes it so that all creatures have to block Taunting Elf if they are able. So let's let you go ahead and just combat in on some free real estate, because while they're all blocking Taunting Elf, your other creatures are unblocked. Carrion Ranger will allow you to untap a target creature by returning a forest to your hand. So this actually does 2 things. It lets you get additional mana from the tap elves. It also lets you get some extra mana from your forest sometimes, because you can tap a forest for mana, float it, return it to your hand, and then play it again. Same thing with Gingerbread Cabin. You can actually get the comes into play effect of Gingerbread Cabin and get additional food tokens, which sometimes you do need to gain that life for the Hurricane effect. So this card actually ends up doing quite a bit for just 1 mana. It's a really strong card. Leaf Crown Visionary is a new one from Dominaria United. It is a lord for 2, and also lets you spend mana to draw additional cards. Now, not every creature card that is a support in this deck is actually an elf. Defiler Vigor will help increase the size of your field while also reducing mana costs, so you can cast more spells. The deck doesn't have any particular issues with mana, but sometimes you just want to get those +1/+1 counters out. And sometimes you do, for whatever reason, just have an issue with mana, in which case, being able to cut costs is really nice. Nyxbloom Ancient will triple the amount of mana produced from any permanent. Soul of New Phyrexia, because you generate so much mana, this is a great way to protect your field. And if it's in your graveyard, you can use it once from the graveyard to also protect your field. So this guy is actually kind of an MVP in the deck, really. Just super synergistic with the deck. You want to keep your stuff alive. He does it. It's just the way it is. And then lastly, Skyshaw Poacher. Basically, it has 3 tap, search your library for an elf card, and put on the battlefield. Super simple, human poacher. So they're enslaving elves, and that's unfortunate, but that's the way things were back in Nemesis block. Nowadays, it's just a way to get combo pieces out. We do have one last group of elves I want to talk about, and these are the combat-specific ones. Emerald Elfheim Elite is one of the new ones. 4 mana for a 3/3. Whenever it attacks, it gets +X/+X, where X is the number of elves in play, so he does buff himself, and he can deal damage as if he weren't blocked. That might be the most important thing, because while Ezuri is going to be giving you trample, they can still soak up that damage that they have have enough stuff on the field, where this will tell them, no, you can't even do that. So ideally, this is kind of like a backup win against someone who maybe just has a super large field, or they themselves can produce an infinite amount of creatures. Maybe they can get a Pestermite combo going during combat and actually block your infinite infinites because you can't tap out anymore. So this guy lets you work around that. Eladamri, Lord of Leaves, he does combo very well with Yavimaya, Cradle of Growth, because he gives all of your elves forest wall. So as long as your opponent controls a forest, they can't be blocked. Now the thing is, you can give them forest with Yavimaya, so very good for that. He also gives your elves Shroud. Elvish Champion is somewhat affordable. He gives all elves +1/+1 in forest walk. So again, if you have Yavimaya out, all your elves are unblockable. And then you lastly have Belling Tangleworm. Intimidate was an effect introduced for a very brief time in the game. It was the not so scary version of Fear. It made it so that creatures of the color can only be blocked by creatures of their color and artifact creatures. So Belling Tangleworm makes it so that all of your creatures have Intimidate. What Intimidate does is says this creature can't be blocked except by artifact creatures and or creatures that share a color with it. It makes it so that only green creatures and only artifact creatures can block the creatures in your deck. Alright, and that's everything in the deck. There are some more expensive cards in this version of the deck. They are absolutely not necessary. You can definitely take them out and have other cards replace them. Nyxbloom Ancient is the only one for the more expensive cards you kind of really want to have in the deck, because the mana doubling effect is really strong and necessary, and you don't have access to other ones that would affect your creatures, such as Kinenbond or Prodigy, because he's in blue. But you do have other effects. You definitely don't need Eladamri, for example. You don't need Skyshroud Poacher. Card I keep around for like when I travel and I go to a new area and I don't want to necessarily play the full powered version of the deck because this is kind of optimized for my play area. So maybe I want to do something a little bit more casual. I will definitely take out Skyshroud Poacher for Elvish Harbinger. Because I play this deck a little bit, people when they see them playing it tend to shy away from black decks. So I don't main board Reap anymore, but when I go somewhere new, I will typically take out one of the regrowth type effects. Usually it's Revive, and put Reap in because I think it's a fantastic card. And if you haven't watched my short about Reap, definitely do so. And with that, we're all set. Thank you so much for watching. Have a good one.